What if I told you there's a photograph so disturbing, so cursed, that entire case files were erased just to bury the family behind it? Faded, curled at the edges, captured in grainy black and white, it shows two barefoot boys standing in the Kentucky dirt. Their arms hang stiff at their sides. Their mouths are slack. Their eyes wrong. One looks just past the camera, the other seems to look at nothing at all. They look like twins, but not quite. Their faces match, yet not cleanly, like a reflection in shattered glass. Locals came to call them the Mirror Boys, and once you hear their story, you'll understand why the name alone still makes people lower their voices. At first, it's easy to dismiss. Just an old photograph from a poor Appalachian hollow, nothing more. But for those who grew up near Hyden, Kentucky, this wasn't a picture, it was a warning. People whispered that the boys were born with the same soul split into uneven halves. Others said they weren't born at all but made. And if you follow the trail of rumours, lost reports and erased records, the truth that emerges is far darker than folklore. This wasn't just family tragedy. This was a bloodline collapsing in on itself until it produced something unrecognisable. The boys lived in total isolation, raised by a man their neighbours barely remembered, a grandfather who hadn't spoken to another adult in over 20 years. His cabin sat miles from the nearest road, buried so deep in the woods, the land itself felt heavy, as if the trees were listening. There were no birth records, no church rosters, no school enrolment, no tracing in county books after 1921. From 1938 to 1954, what happened in that cabin was never documented. No newspapers covered it. No police files survived. Only scraps remained, rumours, letters discovered under rotting floorboards, and one caseworker's report that mysteriously vanished from the state archives in 1973. From those fragments, a horrifying pattern emerges, a grandfather raising not his grandsons, but his sons. And if you've already stayed this long, you should know every detail that follows will make you wonder why no one wanted these boys to be remembered, and why some people believe they were never supposed to survive at all. What if I told you there's a single photograph so disturbing that it became an American legend, a piece of dark history so unsettling that entire case files were erased just to hide it? This is not an internet creepypasta. This is not a horror movie script. This is an unsolved mystery rooted in the Appalachian Mountains, one that has haunted Hyden, Kentucky for generations. The photograph still circulates in whispers, sometimes appearing on obscure forums under titles like The Cursed Twins or Appalachian Horror nobody talks about. The photo itself is faded, curled at the edges, captured in grainy black and white. It shows two barefoot boys standing in the Kentucky dirt. Their arms hang stiff, their mouths hang slightly open, and their eyes are wrong. One stares just past the camera, as if tracking something unseen. The other does not seem to look at anything at all. Their faces almost match, but not perfectly, like a reflection in broken glass. People who grew up in those hills came to call them the Mirror Boys. And if you've ever seen the image even once, you understand why that name alone is enough to make people uneasy. At first glance, outsiders might dismiss it. Just another relic of Appalachian poverty, just two nameless kids caught in a moment of stillness. But in Hyden, the picture was never just a curiosity. It was a warning. Locals whispered that the twins had been born with the same soul split into uneven halves. Others, more superstitious, believed they weren't born at all but made. And when you trace the scattered pieces of evidence, rumours, lost welfare reports, fragments of letters found years later, you start to see a pattern far darker than folklore. The boys were raised in total isolation, cut off from the outside world by their grandfather, a man who hadn't spoken to another adult in more than 20 years. His cabin sat miles off the main road, buried so deep in the woods that people swore the trees themselves seemed to listen. The land around it felt heavy, as if it was holding secrets. No birth certificates, no marriage licenses, no church records, no trace in county books after 1921. It was as if the family had been erased. From 1938 to 1954, what happened in that cabin was never documented. No newspapers touched it, no police files survived. Only whispers, only fragments, only the kind of half-truths that survive in American folklore. Years later, during a flood, old letters were discovered, hidden beneath a cabin floorboard. They spoke of strange rituals of silence, of boys who were never allowed to look into mirrors because their faces were not their own. One caseworker's report, the only official document tied to the children, mysteriously vanished from the state archives in 1973. From these scraps, a chilling picture emerged: a grandfather raising not his grandsons, but his sons. A bloodline folding in on itself until it became something unrecognizable. And if you're still listening, you've already crossed a line. You've stepped into one of America's most disturbing unsolved mysteries, a story of creepy twins, Appalachian horror, and a family that was never supposed to survive. For years, the photograph was all anyone had. But in 1949, someone claimed to see the twins in the flesh. A traveling merchant selling tools across eastern Kentucky told a story that would later spread like wildfire through American folklore. He said he passed by the hollow where the old cabin stood, and as he rode past the porch he saw them. Two boys, barefoot, pale, motionless. They stared at him like they had never seen another human being before. The merchant described their faces in detailed mirror images, but carved wrong. Foreheads slightly sloped, eyes narrow and slanted in ways he could not place. One boy walked with a limp, but there was no visible injury. The other blinked so slowly it looked painful, as if closing his eyelids required effort. And it wasn't just their appearance that unsettled him. It was their stillness. He said they did not fidget. They did not smile. They did not speak. They only stared, as if something inside them had already calcified, as if part of them was stone. In his own words, no child should ever look that empty. That single sentence would become one of the most quoted lines in Appalachian horror, circles retold in true crime forums and creepypasta videos decades later. After leaving the hollow, the merchant did something rare for the time. He wrote a letter to the county welfare office, not because he saw bruises, not because he saw chains, but because, in his words, something was missing in them. Something human. That report, like so many others, disappeared into bureaucratic silence. Hyden was already a town in collapsed coal mines, closing families, fleeing roads, washed out by floods. A call about strange twins in a forgotten hollow never even made it to the bottom of the pile. But what the merchant didn't see was far worse. The boys never left the cabin unless forced. Their grandfather fed them in silence, always with a rifle leaning against the wall. He spoke in old phrases, words no one else in the county used. He called them my repeats. He told them they were chosen. He covered every mirror in burlap, forbidding them to see their reflections. He whispered to them that their faces were not theirs, that they belonged to a time before names. And the boys believed him because they had nothing else to believe in. In scraps, later discovered words carved into the underside of a bed frame. With a nail, one of the boys wrote, "I was born too late. My brother cries without sound. We share the same night. These fragments are all that remain of their voices, haunting echoes of children who lived without identity, without birth, without a future." This was the first documented encounter. The first time someone outside that cabin tried to raise a warning, but the warning went unheard. The files vanished. The county moved on. And what was happening behind those cabin walls continued in silence. And then in 1953, someone else crossed the boundary. This time, not a passing merchant, but a young woman with a camera, a journal, and a determination that would cost her everything. By 1953, the silence around the twins was finally broken. Not by a merchant or a rumour, but by a young woman named Evelyn Cross. She was 24, idealistic, sent from Louisville as part of an outreach program meant to document families living in extreme isolation. Evelyn had no idea she was walking into one of America's darkest unsolved mysteries. County records show her driver refused to go down the washed-out road leading into the hollow. So Evelyn hiked nearly 5 miles alone through the Kentucky wilderness to reach the cabin. She carried a journal, a camera, and a dangerous level of trust in the system that sent her there. What she left behind would become some of the most disturbing evidence in Appalachian folklore: grainy photographs of the twins and the cabin, and her final words written in that journal. The photographs are haunting. 2 boys sit on the rotting porch, their clothes several sizes too big, their hands locked tightly together. In the next frame, the grandfather appears, his face blurred by motion, one arm raised, as if to strike or to silence. The last photo is of the ground blurred and tilted as though taken in panic. Her journal begins calmly filled with descriptions of the poverty and the eerie quiet of the hollow. But on her second day, the tone changes. She writes, "There is something wrong with the boys. They speak in fragments, unfinished sentences. They never let go of each other's hands. When I asked if they had a mother, both pointed to the same tree." Evelyn reported what she saw to the local office, but they dismissed her. No one wanted another scandal in the hills. No one wanted to stir up a family that should have never been there in the first place. They told her to drop it, to move on, to focus on families that could still be helped. The bureaucracy closed its eyes, as it always did, and Evelyn was left alone with what she had witnessed. But Evelyn did not give up. She returned not once, but twice. On her final visit, she made the mistake of staying the night. Her last journal entry is one of the most chilling fragments in American true crime history. There is something in the way they breathe. It's like watching lungs that never learned how. She never returned to Louisville. No body was found. The case was quietly closed as an accident. But one detail still defies explanation. Her journal was recovered years later, wrapped in a scrap of fabric cut from one of the twins' shirts. It carried a faint metallic smell iron, maybe blood. The deputy who filed it into evidence resigned the same week. To his wife he whispered words that would echo through Kentucky folklore. They weren't raised by him. They were forged by him. From this moment, the story of the twins was no longer just rumour. It was tragedy. It was evidence. It was a spiral of silence and danger that no one wanted to face. And in the spring of 1954, something inside that hollow finally erupted. Smoke rose from the cabin, curling above the trees like a signal. But what investigators found was far stranger than fire. In the spring of 1954, silence broke. Neighbours from the Langford family, who lived closest to the hollow, remembered waking to the sight of smoke rising above the tree line, where the cabin should have been. But it wasn't normal smoke. It didn't billow like a fire. It curled upward slowly, clinging to the sky like it didn't want to leave. Caleb Langford, then a boy, rode his mule halfway up the hill before stopping. He never forgot the smell. Not wood, not coal, something stranger. He described it as wet copper and mould, the smell of iron in water, the smell of blood. Then he heard it. Not a scream, not even a cry. He called it a hollow sound, like grief trying to find a mouth. That same week, the county clerk received an anonymous package. Inside was a single sheet of paper typed in all capitals, no signature, no return address. It read only 14 words. The blood went in circles. The twins were never meant to see the sun. 2 weeks later, a federal team arrived to investigate. But what they found inside the hollow was nothing anyone could have predicted. The cabin had been burned not from the outside in, but from the inside out, as if it had imploded. No bodies were recovered. Just fragments, a jawbone, a child's shoe, several teeth, all belonging to the same mouth. Yet in the ash were 2 sets of impressions. Small barefoot footprints pressed side by side, walking calmly toward the creek bed. And then, vanishing into the mud. This discovery shattered all sense of logic. Fires consume. They erase. They leave ruin. But here the fire left a trail suggesting that what lived inside that cabin didn't die with it. Officials filed reports. But as with every document tied to the twins, they soon disappeared from public record. The families in Hyden whispered instead. They said the boys had escaped the fire. They said their grandfather had vanished into smoke. And they said the forest itself had taken them back. But the sightings didn't stop. In 1956, a hunter claimed he saw 2 boys standing in a creek by moonlight arms, linked faces turned toward the water. When he shouted, they vanished. In 1962, a retired school teacher told a story of picking up 2 silent hitchhikers near Pikeville, pale as paper, eyes unblinking. She asked where they were going. One whispered, "We're going back." Each account ended the same way. No proof, no names, just memories too strange to dismiss, too heavy to forget. And with each new sighting, one thing became clear: the twins were not gone. They were out there somewhere, untethered from death, untethered from reason. This was the breaking point. The moment when Hyden stopped treating the story as rumour and started fearing it as truth. When the impossible began to look inevitable. When neighbours started asking themselves what kind of bloodline could survive fire erasure and silence. And in 1971, someone finally tried to answer that question. A retired psychiatrist named Dr. Marshall Gravers moved into the area. He came looking for the truth. What he found was worse. By 1971, the story of the twins had become more than whispers. It had become folklore, a living infection in the memory of Eastern Kentucky. And then Dr. Marshall Gravers arrived. Officially, he was a retired psychiatrist from Ohio seeking quiet. But locals later learned the truth. He came because of Evelyn Cross. She'd been his student once, and her disappearance haunted him. He believed the stories. Or at least he believed enough of them to start digging. For years, Graves collected everything he could: hospital records, police reports, handwritten testimonies from neighbours who were already elderly by then. He interviewed families, sifted through death certificates, traced family trees. And what he found disturbed him most, not because it explained everything, but because so much of it had been deliberately erased. Entire branches of one bloodline simply vanished from county registries after 1912. Tracing those names backward led him to the Merriweathers, a family disgraced generations earlier in a scandal involving incest between siblings. On paper, the family ended. No male heirs remained. But Gravers argued otherwise. He believed the twins were not simply inbred. They were the product of generations of closed-loop reproduction. a bloodline folding inward like paper, each generation spiraling further into deformity, silence and psychosis. And the grandfather, he said, was not a guardian at all. He was the architect, the final bricklayer in a structure built of flesh and madness. Before Graves could publish, he disappeared. His trailer was found empty, the door left wide open. On the kitchen table, all of his files were stacked neatly. On top of the pile was a single photograph, two boys standing in a shallow creek, arms linked heads, tilted eyes that reflected no light. The aftermath didn't stop there. In 1992, a road construction project unearthed bones near Hyden. At first thought to be animal remains, they were later identified as belonging to at least 3 children, none older than 10. Skulls were misshapen, teeth fused together, and carved into one jawbone was a faint infinity symbol. The file was closed as indeterminate historical remains. But the forensic assistant who examined them quit her career shortly after describing the bones as too wrong to be coincidence, too similar to be natural. 15 years later, in 2007, hikers stumbled upon a crude wooden cross near the creek bed, where the twins had last been seen. Rusted wire bound a child's pair of shoes to it, perfectly preserved, the kind worn in the 1950s. Beneath them, carved into the wood, were 7 chilling words: same blood, same soul, same end. No one claimed responsibility. The object vanished before authorities could examine it. And in 2019, the most unsettling evidence yet surfaced. A government drone surveying remote wilderness for fire risk captured 15 seconds of footage. The official report dismissed it as wildlife imagery. But a technician who leaked the clip before being fired swore it showed something else. 2 thin figures, barefoot, moving slowly through the underbrush in unnatural synchronicity. Their heads tilted the same way, their arms swinging in perfect unison. Even in grainy grayscale, their movement looked wrong. Too mirrored, too precise. As if they weren't walking but performing. The footage disappeared from public record within weeks. The technician himself vanished soon after. But in his last anonymous post, he left one final sentence. It's not that they survived. It's that someone wanted them to. And that is the echo that lingers today. Not a conclusion, not closure. Just fragments, bones, journals, burned cabins, erased files, children's shoes, and rumours traded like infection through Appalachian bloodlines. No grave, no names, no final answer. Only the weight of a story that refuses to die. The story of the twins doesn't end. It never has. Every attempt to bury it, burned cabins, erased case files, vanished photographs has only made it stronger. What lingers is not evidence, not proof, but weight. A silence pressed down, like soil growing heavier with each generation that tries to look away. And maybe that is why the story survives. Because silence does not erase. Silence preserves. Think about what we've uncovered. A family tree with no branches, only loops. A bloodline folding inward until it became something unrecognizable. Witnesses who vanished after speaking. Bones unearthed with marks no child should carry. A drone clip erased before it could be studied. These fragments may not fit neatly together, but they share one terrifying truth. Something was born in that hollow, and it has never truly left. And here is the part that unsettles me the most. If this story is true, it means blood itself can trap memory, passing trauma down like inheritance. But if it is only folklore, then why does it feel so heavy? Why do so many documents disappear? Why do so many voices fall silent? The real horror may not be whether the twins survived. The real horror may be how easily the earth hides the things we choose not to see. This leaves you with a question only you can answer. If this was your bloodline, if this was your town, would you fight to expose it, or would you pray it stayed forgotten? Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe the twins were real? Do you think they still walk somewhere in the Kentucky wilderness? Or are they only a legend carved into Appalachian folklore? Tell me in the comments what you believe, because your perspective is part of keeping this mystery alive. And if this story left you unsettled, if it made you think twice about what history chooses to remember and what it chooses to erase, don't let it fade. Save this video, share it, and make sure to subscribe right now so you don't miss the next descent into America's forgotten dark history. Because as you've seen tonight, sometimes the most terrifying stories are not the ones we invent, but the ones we try hardest to forget.